Welcome to this week's episode of Biz Success in 15, where top experts share hot tips and strategies that you can implement in as little as 15 minutes to build your dream business. And now here's your host, the visibility whiz, Cindy J.
Hi, I'm Cindy J, the Visibility Whiz, and welcome to this episode of Biz Success in 15, where top experts share hot tips and strategies that you can implement in 15 minutes or less to build your business. Our guest today is Gail Nowak, and she delivers thought-provoking insights and challenges for coaches, consultants, entrepreneurs, and business owners who want to achieve greater levels of influence, impact, and income. She is the founder and CEO of The Story Stylist, a marketing consulting company that transforms clients into powerful spokespersons for their business. The clients she has worked with across the globe command higher fees, generate consistent leads, increase revenue, The clients she has worked with across the globe command higher fees, generate consistent leads, increased revenue, land higher profile interviews and speaking gigs, and become leading experts in their field. Welcome, Gail. It's a pleasure to have you.
Thank you so much for having me, Cindy.
I'm really excited to speak to you today. I love The Story Stylist. I think that is such a fantastic name that you have there. And so before we get into stories, can you share with us a personal or business challenge that you had to overcome in order to achieve your level of success?
Yeah, actually, Cindy, we're going to get into stories a little bit quicker than you might have anticipated because my biggest personal and business challenge was actually coming to grips with telling my own story. Mm-hmm. And it really took the second year in my business when I had burned through more than $28,000 in personal savings. I had racked up $14,000 in credit card debt. I was super frustrated because I feel like I was really doing everything that I was supposed to do to make my business work. But deep down, I just knew in my heart and in my gut that there was this one thing that I hadn't done, and that was tell the story. So I had been, certainly telling stories. As a story stylist, you need to tell your own stories, right?
Right.
And I've certainly been trying stories on, but there was this one story that I felt like, this is off limits. It's not, it's not for my business. And then I sort of was at this crossroads, and I really literally had to face this story. And that was the story of me at age 24, waking up in an ER fighting for my life because hours before I had downed a bottle of pills. Mm-hmm. And I had overdosed on alcohol. And in that moment, I had a tube snake down my throat, pumping all of those toxins out of my stomach. And the reason why I had done that was because I could no longer bear the pain of another story that I had buried for more than 10 years. And that was the story of being assaulted at age 9, only to be accused of lying when I shared that at age 14. And so the message at that time for me was loud and clear that my story didn't matter and that really I didn't matter. And it was something that I believed deeply in my core because of those experiences. And yet the funny thing is that my faith in other people's stories never wavered. I think it's why my entire career has revolved around story, and even, a significant amount of my childhood, I had focused on story in some way. So
Exactly.
I love helping other people with their stories. And I think that's because it was so hard to share my own. So it wasn't until like this fear of like my business failing and letting my family down that I was even willing to consider that maybe this story does matter, and maybe not telling it is holding me back. And so I sort of went into this exploratory process to sort of help me, get the mindset straightened out, and get the courage to tell that story.
I am so 100% in line with you, and thank you for being vulnerable and sharing your story. And I'd never heard that. I've listened to some of your interviews before, but for some reason I missed that. I guess it was all meant to wait for today. And, because I know, like, I'm always telling stories too, but then I have that one story that I do tell a little bit, and that's just that I was sexually abused by my father growing up. And I do tell it a little bit, but I've always wondered, I don't want to be known as like that girl. So I'm always like, how can I incorporate my story into my business? Because I'm a business coach. I share people how to be visible online. And so much that goes into vulnerability. And I think that everybody has that story. And right away, they know what it is, regardless what it is. Nobody's story is better or worse than somebody else's, because we all experienced our own life. And it just is what it is, but it's how we present it to the world. So I'm even more excited to speak to you further now. And, so first of all, can you share with us how your powerful personal story can even drive your business growth?
Yeah. So, I'll start with what happened with my story as an example, and then, we can kind of talk about it in a more general way. But when I first went public with my story, I definitely went through this process of like, how does this even relate? It's so clear to me now, and it's not surprising for me to hear, Cindy, that you're a visibility coach, because, right, like what happens when we're in, personal or family trauma like that? It's all about visibility, right? Like it's all about being seen and being heard, or not being seen and not being heard. And so, first of all, thank you for being vulnerable and sharing that feedback with me. But yeah, so anyway, when I first went public with that story, the whole visibility piece it was terrifying.
Yeah.
and so I said, okay, well, how can I do this where I'm not just absolutely terrified beyond taking any action? And so, writing's always sort of been my thing. So I decided to share it as part of an email engagement series. And like I said, I even though that felt like the safest way for me to come out with that story, I still felt like I was going to throw up when I hit send on that email. I think that a big piece of it was that I was worried about what other people were going to think. I was worried that they were going to be offended. I was worried that people weren't going to be able to handle it, or I think the biggest thing for me was that I was worried people were going to feel bad, and that's not at all what I was going for. I wasn't at that point, other than the fact that I, had thought I had resolved these things and they were bubbling up. At that point in my life, things were really good, minus the struggles with the business. Things were really good for me personally. And so I was like, I don't, obviously I have a little bit of residual things going on with the story, but I feel like I'm in a good place. So, a lot of my clients, a lot of people sort of worry about those same things when they're contemplating sharing their personal stories. So, and maybe some of them are listening right now. So hopefully what I say next will, ease some of those fears, because I can't even tell you how many people called me and emailed me and kind of responded in a similar way as you did, after hearing my story. And the thing that really just blew my mind, Cindy, was that I couldn't see it before I did it, but this really was a direct line to profit in my business. Within 3 weeks of sending that email, I had 4 new clients. I had lined up over $7,800 in new business. And the month before I had shared this story, I made a whopping $14.
Right.
And so it really caught my attention. And at first I was like, well, maybe this is a fluke. But 2 months later, I was making a profit for the first time. 4 months later, I was writing myself a steady check, and my business has been significantly growing ever since.
Yes.
So,
and I've heard that so many times, and about whenever you start sharing. And like I said, I share so much, and I've never really been against sharing it. It's just knowing again how to incorporate it into my business.
Right.
Whenever it first came out, I actually shared this story and on stage in front of 800 people.
Oh my God.
At an event I was at, which was a profound experience. And like you, so many people came up to me. And so then I thought, because I had been a divorce coach, then I thought, well, I'm supposed to help people that's been sexually abused. But that was a total disaster in of itself. And then I sort of just morphed into being the visibility whiz, which is something I really love doing. But I've always felt that disconnect between how to combine the two. Moving on, what do you believe is the core component that makes somebody successful in their business?
Yeah. And before I answer that, I just want to say that, there are a lot of people, women especially, but men too. Men occasionally will share a similar experience. But I do want to be clear that not everyone has or even needs to share a story about overcoming personal trauma, but I know in my heart, that the right story really can set you free. It can set you free in your life. It can set you free in your business. But as far as the core component about what will make someone successful in their business, I think it really boils down to being committed to being an educator and an advocate for the success of your clients, because everything else, I think, will follow after that. Once you're committed to that, things like being afraid to share your story, it becomes less about you as an individual and more about, okay, well, how does this help me help my clients?
Right.
So it really sort of helps you break through any challenges that you might come up against when you're really sort of putting your audience and your clients and your prospects at the forefront of the work that you're doing.
And that's the question right there. It's more than like with me, I'm like, how do I incorporate it? It's like, because it is definitely helping my clients. It's how do I utilize my story? Because lots of stories I have, I know exactly right away how it helps my clients. And then this one, I don't. And even with that, I'm sure there's a lot of other people, like you said, it doesn't have to be a traumatic story. It could just be a simple story of how you learned to say no to somebody, or it could be a simple story of how you started your business. So there's so many stories. Some are happier, some aren't so happy, but it's a story that makes you such a huge part of who you are.
Absolutely. And what you were saying about the story about how you started your business, I would just tweak that and say, why? Because we all have some, we have the surface wise, right? Like, oh, well, I'm good at this, or I want to make money, or I want to, impact people. But there's always a deeper personal drive that gets you up in the morning every day, whether you're having a good day or a bad day. That's the story that you want to start telling people, what is your personal drive behind who you help and how you help them.
And moving on, how does storytelling help entrepreneurs and small business owners become a recognized expert?
Yeah. So telling your story, obviously it makes you stand out and it makes you really unforgettable to your audience. And the more that you tell it, whether you're speaking or you're doing interviews or, you're writing about it, the more other people will start to tell it. I always share this example of Brendan Bouchard with my clients because I had heard his story, his car crash story, many, 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 many times before I ever heard him tell it himself. And I was using it as an example with my clients, but I had never actually heard him tell the story. But that's $1 million story, right? I mean,
right.
When other people are telling your story, that, you've done something right. It really makes you sticky in the minds of your audience. It makes you unforgettable. And I will say that it also helps you yourself, right? It also helps you in a personal perspective because it helps you step into your own authority. It's a real powerful way to not just share your expertise and your credibility and a little bit of your vulnerability, but it also is a powerful way to help you really sort of feel it deeply in your core.
Right. I absolutely love that. And, going down, talking about stories, as we both said, is that everybody has their stories, and we have multiple stories, from the day that we're born. So many stories. So how does one even start to determine which story to tell in their business?
Yeah. So you really want to start with, what's the purpose for telling the story, right? Because you're right. There's all kinds of stories that you can tell. And I highly recommend telling stories whenever you have the opportunity to. But, obviously your signature story is all about the why behind what you do. It's a great story to share when you're building trust with a targeted audience that doesn't know you. If you're launching a product or a program, you may want to tell your signature story if it logically leads people down a path to, taking the next step with you, but it might not be that story. You might want a story that could be your own, or it could be someone else's story that aligns with whatever it is that you're offering people and shows that, yes, this is something that I know can help you solve a problem that you might be having. And of course, there are stories that you want to share to establish credibility and to get that third-party endorsement. That's where you want to share something like a client case study, for example, or client story. So you really want to start with the question of what will this story support? And then that will guide you in figuring out what story to tell.
Yes. It's always the goal. So
what's your objective? What's your goal? Exactly. Like, am I selling something? Am I creating rapport and trust? Am I just trying to get some sort of, am I trying to help people establish for themselves if they see me as an expert? And that's where that third-party endorsement comes in.
And one of the reasons why I love storytelling of any type is it's how we connect with other people.
Right.
There's no connecting with other people if we're not telling a story.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
And Gail, can you share with us how could we craft our story to make the biggest impact and increase our income?
Yeah. So once you know why you're telling your story, what your goal is, I always recommend starting at the end. It's always easier for me and a lot of my clients to sort of reverse engineer your story. And one of the mistakes that I see business owners make is sort of including too much background leading up to the good stuff. So you really want to start with, okay, well, this is the reason why I'm telling the story. This is really the message that I want my audience to really resonate with. So what is the story that I can wrap around that logically leads them to that message? So you might have a couple of different stories, but when you're clear about your message that you want to share with your audience, it's a lot easier to sort of pick from that library of stories that you have one that actually is a perfect fit. So that's the first step, is really sort of thinking about your message first, and then going back and remembering that a story is really about how a person changes. So a lot of times people tell anecdotes, or they share a metaphor, or those are pieces of a story. It's actually not, it's not an official story. And so you want to think about, okay, well, where was I at sort of the early stages of the story? What happened to make me change? What happened after that change? And so you want to think about it as kind of this 3-act play, what have you. And in the beginning, you really, like I said, I see a lot of business owners sort of providing too much information in the beginning. And what you really want to do is drop people right into the story and get their attention from the get-go.
Right.
And that could mean starting with a real big bang, or it could just be more subtle, but piquing people's curiosity. Using the word imagine is a great way. If you're kind of stumped with the first line of your story, the word imagine is a great way to pull people in, because they just, like, your brain just goes into overdrive and starts imagining whatever it is that comes next out of your mouth. One of my first clients in my Inside Story program started her story with the statement that she said, "I came to gardening from a broken heart." And this was years ago. She was one of my very first clients, and I still remember that line, because it just gives me chills, and it's that feeling of like, oh, wow, tell me more. And so that's kind of what you want to create at the beginning of your story. But then you also want to lead people through this journey of, okay, well, that happened, and then what changed, and what were the results of that change.
Right. And that's, I think, where it all comes in, the results. But also, as you've mentioned a few times, is a lot of times you're going to give too much detail about what happened, which can smother your story if it's too much detail, depending upon the length that you have to tell it.
Right, exactly.
Yeah. Okay, great tips. Thank you very much. And Gail, I know that you have a strategy that our listeners can implement in 15 minutes or less to build their business. And I'm sure it has something to do with storytelling. So can you share what that is?
Yeah, well, I wish I could say that you can develop your story in 15 minutes, but it really does deserve more time and focus and love than 15 minutes. But what you can do once you have that full length story, you want to definitely set aside some time to shorten it for different situations, for different marketing channels. Obviously, when you're out networking or having a conversation with someone, you don't want them to be a captive audience, right? So you don't want to necessarily have them be silent for 5 or 10 minutes as you share your stories. Or if you're doing an interview, like a TV interview, for example, you're only going to get 1 or 2 minutes. So you really want to know how to tell the most impactful parts of your story as a headline, as a movie trailer, and as the full length feature. So that you're ready in any situation. Yeah, exactly. But you want to start with the bigger version first, because it's a lot easier to cut it down later.
Even with any movie, if somebody, one of my colleagues, she used to be a movie director, so she talks a lot about movies and how it relates to us in business. But I'm thinking, you don't make the trailer of the movie till after the movie's done.
Right, exactly.
Or at least written. I'm sorry, I think I interrupted you. Go ahead.
Yeah, no, I mean, I think that it's true. Like it's kind of like a book too, right? Like you write the book, you create the product first, and then you go back and you do the liner notes on the book and the description on the back. So I love that. I love that movie analogy or the book analogy.
Yes.
But there are other places where you do have more time. If you're out speaking, you can share the full length version of your story. If you're doing a podcast or a radio interview, you might have more time to share the full length or maybe a slightly edited down version of that story. So that would be my 15-minute tip, is just you can certainly do this in 15 minutes or less, is just kind of go through it and shorten it for your different communication channels.
So with your story, you should incorporate it like whenever you're a guest on podcasts or speaking in person, and it doesn't need to be quote unquote the theme of it. So do you put it on your speaker sheet and stuff as well, sort of like a highlight of it?
Yeah, so it could be that's an example of where maybe the headline might make sense. The headline of your story, not necessarily of your speaker sheet, but like with an elevator pitch, for example, or even a media pitch, you can sort of pluck the headline of your overall story and incorporate that into, whatever it is that you're providing as a description of your speaking engagement or what you're pitching to the media.
Mm-hmm. Love it. Thank you.
Yeah.
I could definitely speak to you all day long about storytelling. And I know that you do have a fantastic gift for our listeners. Can you share what it is?
Yeah. So part of becoming a recognized expert is being able to share your story in the media. And I have a background. I started out as a journalist and became a PR executive before I started my own business. So this is a real significant piece of my core business is helping people develop their authority once they have and know their personal story. So being able to share your story well in the media it is a part of developing that authority. But before you even have the opportunity to do that, you need to know how to pitch that story to the media. So I've put together a cheat sheet to help you craft the perfect media pitch. And this is really the exact pitching formula that I've used to get my clients on national, local, and trade media.
Mm-hmm. Wonderful. Thank you very much. So head on over to bizsuccessin15.com/Gayle, Gayle, and grab your perfect media pitch cheat sheet, how to make your pitch land your next media interview and become a recognized expert. So Gayle, do you have any parting words?
Yes. So imagine what you can change for you and your business and your best prospects when you own your authority and share your story.
Thank you. That's a wonderful parting words. Really like that. And thank you for being my guest today, Gayle. It's been a pleasure.
Thanks, Cindy. I've had so much fun.
Thank you. And to our listeners, if you enjoyed today's show, feel free to share it with your friends. We all have a story that needs to be told, and Gayle's your go-to person to help you figure out your story. And hop on over to bizsuccessin15.com/Gayle. You'll find all links from today's show, and you'll be able to re-listen to Gayle's words of wisdom. And while you're there, be sure to grab your own copy of the perfect media pitch. So with that, I hope you have a great week. Tune in next week for another episode of Biz Success in 15 with another awesome guest. Big hugs and bye-bye.
You've been listening to Biz Success in 15. For all links mentioned in today's show and to watch or listen to previous episodes, visit bizsuccessin15.com. Thanks so much for listening, and be sure to tune in next week for another amazing guest.